All right, ladies and gentlemen, how are you doing? It's a damn well heat wave out here. Hope everybody's doing well. Welcome to another episode of Megaman's Legends. And here we got ourselves a very intellectual one, very intellectual legend that we have here. He went under a couple of names before: JoTaro, JoStar, Joe to the Seth. But at this moment, we just call him Joe to the Dad, or AKA Donut Lord on Street Fighter 6. I welcome you guys, Joe, Donut Lord, JoStar, Maysonet. Yo, what's going on, my guy? How you doing, bro?
Yo, thanks for having me. What an intro. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Been going through a lot of shout outs to P Diddy for all the different name changes there. But I mean, the common thread is hey, I'm just Joe. You know what I mean? So yeah, in the past I went by Joe the Seth, but then I changed it because at that time I think Street Fighter 4 was like the main game a lot of the time. So people thought that I was a Seth player. And I was like, no, it's Seth like Joseph. And then I was like, but then after a while I was like, how about JoTaro? Because, like, who doesn't like JoJo's, right? And then, but after that I was just like, I think I'm going through a little bit of a rebrand. So JoStar works for now, and I mean, who knows, I might change it down the road. I kind of just use Donut Lord as like my in-game name for most games these days, but in the FGC I think I'm sticking with JoStar for the most part, but yeah, you'll see the Donut Lord out and about, but yeah.
Well, that's a great introduction. I know you were a man of a lot of hats before.
Yes, sir.
And when I initially met you, you were a man that I would say like to experiment with a lot of characters in the past, especially in Street Fighter 4. Because during the time, I remember when I first met you, you were just like me, a Goken player at first.
Yes, sir.
It's funny because during the 8-bit days, there were, I would call it the Goken fleet.
Yes.
There was myself, there was you, there was John Empowerment Lane, and then there was one other named Dave Wilson.
Yeah.
And we were like the four Gokens that was running wild inside there. So,
yo, shout outs to Dave Wilson, wherever you at, bro. Like, that was my guy. For like, I feel like we played like one or two like of the same characters. He was always a pretty chill dude, but yeah, we all were the Goken army at that time. And then if I randomly swapped to Sagat, Dave Wilson was also Sagat, so it was fun times.
Yeah, that was fun times. It was really fun times. But too bad it kind of broke down afterwards because I think Dave stopped coming and you completely switched from.
Oh yeah.
You went from Goken to Capri at the time. And it was just basically me and John left. And it was interesting because I know DiCaprio was your girl, for sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, a big reason that made me make the switch initially was I just felt for my playstyle, Goken just wasn't sustainable. Like, in a game where, like, OS was all over the place, one of the easiest OSs to have was crouch tech. Yeah. And Goken does not have a good crouch tech. You have to commit to crouching short. It doesn't chain, so you can't really. I mean, honestly, I was just trying to. That was my early sense of getting with the times. I was like, yeah, I can't mash crouch tech with Goken, and I'm getting blown up, just for trying to tech. So I was just like, you know what, it's not sustainable. Everybody has like easy confirms into like from jab links. That was another thing, right? So it's like you needed crouch tech. You needed like strong links from like jab into strong to get your BMBs going, and he can't really do that from jab either. You have to commit to mediums and heavies, and I mean we talk about it to this day. He was a very early Street Fighter 5. I feel like Goken and characters like that were the precursor to where 5 would lead us afterwards. But at that time, I was just like, nah, I can't. Like, he has to be too committal in his normals. Very, unique character playstyle. So I had fun with him, but I was like, yeah, I can't play the game. I mean, what's the fun for me with this character if I cannot actually play the game? And at that time, the latest, I think Ultra had come out, with the additional characters, and yeah, there was Elena, there was Rolento, Hugo, which were all, basically just being transferred over from Cross Tekken because Cross Tekken became a dub, so they just took those characters out and said, hey, why don't we put those characters in Street Fighter 4? But then they pulled a funny one with DiCaprio, and I don't know if you remember, but at the time, DiCaprio, she was like, people felt like she was like a lazy, it was like a lazy character choice, right? People were like, oh, she's just a clone of Cammy. And I sort of thought the same thing, but like, if anyone that knows me know that, I like to feel out the cast until I find that character that really, matches, my character expression, my playstyle. And I was trying her out, and I was like, oh, she's sort of like Cammy, but totally not like Cammy. In the coolest way possible, and I just fell in love after that. I'm like, I got my crouch techs, I can combo out of lights. Like, honestly, I just felt like everything, she was designed so well, and it felt intuitive to me, and I was just, I knew I was in the right place because I was figuring stuff out that would become very basic. Like, people had to figure out certain strategies that just came to me intuitively from day one. I was like, yeah, no, this is my character right here. And then they refused to put her in another game, so it sort of pisses me off. But we always find a way. That
is true. I did remember when she was first announced. If you remember that tournament, I think there was oh man, what tournament was that? That was the one that when Combo Fiend was working with Capcom at the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And when she was first announced, we saw the faces of everybody.
Yep.
Everybody was like, well, what the hell is this?
Exactly.
It was like, what the hell is this? And I remember that tournament, I believe, who won that tournament? I think it was it wasn't PR Rog that won. I think it was somebody that won. And they were doing an exhibition match where, Combo Fiend was playing DiCaprio, and we were listening to what she was doing and everything like that. And I'm like, oh, well, this character is kind of interesting. And I remember, the first person who were like super salty about this character was Arturo Sanchez, because he said the way her toolkit works is that she blows up Sim for free, technically.
Yeah.
But it was like kind of interesting that, how far that she came. And I will say, like, yeah, you were definitely a pretty sick decap player along the time that you're like turning heads. Like, there were the time that you were like, during the bit days, you were streaking on people with her. And I was like, yeah, man. I'm like, yo, we were like happy because we were like, man, this man really found his character. And
I found her, and then the very next year, 5 comes out, so we all just say, you know what, we got to play the new game. And to this day, I'm like, yo, I wish I had another year with her in Ultra. They would have given us updates to, make Elena not, stupid to fight, with her disjointed hitboxes. Shout outs to the Chef's Kiss. Yeah. But yeah, that homie was just taking advantage of all her busted normals, and then guess what? Oh, if you get hit and you get your ultra, healing. So I would love for them to have taken another year to just, hey, let's do a final balance of ultra, a final balance patch, and then I don't know, take some extra time to work on 5 before launch, which ended up being like the worst launch of any fighting game arguably in history.
Absolutely. I remember we talked about healing in terms of how with Elena, I felt like the best way to fix that was make it a super instead of an ultra, because in that, and if you remember in 4, it was kind of tough to really get meter like that.
Right.
So
True.
it would be I feel like that would be like such a nerf that I think Elena would be unplayable, because they would have to rely more on her footsies and her AX move to just get around some things.
Right.
But if it was like super, if it was her super, then you kind of, I feel like you could kind of scope out in terms of who's the ones that's gonna hoard the meter the most, and basically go from there. And then the other part is she would be so susceptible to pressure, because there's a lot of people who just hold meter for her, and they don't want it. They don't want to EX. They don't want to EX out or bust out or anything like that. They much rather just hold it and everything like that. But when 5 came out, that was like, yeah, it was bye 4, because that's when we were labbing the beta days.
Oof.
Oh man.
Oh yeah.
Shout outs to the beta days, man.
Shout outs to those beta days, yes sir. Oh my goodness.
Oh my god. I was telling the story. I think I kind of echoed it a lot. I was telling the story how in New York there was only 3 people that had the beta during the times, and I was one of them, and then the other one was Coach Steve, and then the other one was Li Joe. So we used to lab the beta at my crib until I know you didn't came as much, because
I never came out.
Yeah, you never came out, only because it was too far. But when it came to the bit, it was a whole different story. So when it was at the bit, that's when the traction began. You had like mad people coming to the store trying out the game and everything like that. And I was like, yo, when it was like update time, oh my god, it was like excitement during the time.
Yes,
it was such excitement.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, like, it was bittersweet, because the launch was it was pretty bad. Like, there was some pretty messed up launch as just a game package. But obviously we didn't care as competitive players. We're just like, yeah, just give me the game and we'll play. But there was a lot of stuff that it should have started with that it didn't. And then, yeah, I mean, 5 is 5. What I don't know what you want me to say about that. We'll probably get more into it, later on if we do. But yeah, no, it was 5. It's a pretty memorable and forgettable game in my opinion. But yeah, those beta days was like the most hype I've had for an upcoming game like that. And it was just a sick time.
Yeah, there was totally sick times. But okay, so let's talk about you for a moment, right? Tell me something. Where did you get your start from being casual at first into integrating yourself in the FGC to become competitive?
All right, I think this will be a cool story, but I'll try to keep it brief. I could yap, but I'll take you from the origins, and then it'll be interesting how it all intersects. So I was actually a big fan of fighting games since I was a kid. I mean, like, we're talking maybe PS1 era, like maybe like 97, 98. I think I was probably like 7, like between the ages of like 7 and 8. I just really liked fighting games, because this is like the heyday of the arcade era, and not only that, but like, you would go to anywhere. You would go to a pizzeria, you would go to the mall, you would go to your laundromat, and there was just an arcade cabinet wherever you went. And a lot of the dopest looking games, I think, I have a background in just like art and just being an artist, for illustration and whatnot. So I was always a huge fan of like cartoons, and fighting games were just like some of your favorite cartoons is just being brought to life in like pixel form, and you got cool characters with cool powers fighting each other. Like, I was a Power Rangers, Ninja Turtles kid, so watching anything like that, like in a like a fighting game to me was probably like the earliest best representation of that outside of like beat 'em ups and whatnot. But I really gravitated to fighting games even back then, just aesthetically. I just like the cool character designs. And there was so many to choose from because at that time it was like the peak of like it was like from between 80s and 90s it was like peaking in terms of like the fighting game explosion. Like ever since ST as Street Fighter 2 had come out, everybody was making the copycats and the clones, and that's where we got a lot of like the best fighting games out of. It was like there was a lot of crap, but then you don't get Fatal Fury without the existence of Street Fighter 2. You know what I mean? You don't get these other cool franchises. There was like like World Heroes, like King of Fighters, all that jazz. They don't exist if Street Fighter doesn't exist, or at least Street Fighter 2. So I felt like every arcade or every laundromat I would go to would have a different fighting game just chilling there. And I'm actually a younger brother. I have an older brother, so being boys being boys, we would get a little competitive. I mean, it was a little toxic with my bro, I'm not gonna lie, because he had that older brother syndrome where it's like, you can't beat me, right? And if I would beat him, then it was a problem, you know what I mean, as the younger brother. But I always liked playing against my bro. That's like if you have a sibling, that's honestly your first like friend and also your first rival at the same time, right? So early days, like 90s into the early 2000s, my older brother, that's the person I fought predominantly. But very casual. I didn't take it very seriously. Then we skip ahead a little bit, and Marvel 2 comes out. And I love that game. I wasn't hugely competitive at that one either, but one of my best friends at the time, like this is Dreamcast era, like there was so many epic like 2D fighting games at the time, and Marvel vs. Capcom 2 changed the entire game, for fighting games as a whole. So I just, at that, I think that game was out, like Third Strike was out, some of the best looking and like, fluid fighting games on the market were out at like the early 2000s. But yeah, once again, I wasn't competitive. I mean, I was like a preteen and a teenager, didn't really take it seriously. Cut forward, then I go to college. I think I spent a good amount of time, I liked fighting games, but I was getting into like Smash Melee, so that was probably the most competitive game with a group of friends that I was into, was Melee. But then I would play a few games here and there, like your Tekkens, or I was barely in the Mortal Kombat at the time. Soul Calibur was big, like Dead or Alive, so on and so forth. But I hadn't really touched like a meaty Street Fighter game for a while. And then when I got into college at that time, I think this was probably I graduated in 2007 from high school. So around like 2008, I met this friend in college, and this is like early like YouTube era, and he's like, yo, have you ever seen this like this fighting game footage from this thing called Evo? I go, what's that? And this guy, back in 2008, I had no idea really of the competitive side of fighting games. He showed me Evo Moment 37. Ooh. And so yes, I'm like, this is YouTube era, so like things going viral. You didn't know what the formula was for it, but like all of a sudden I see this Evo Moment, and it cracked my head open. It blew my mind. I was like, and it just like the reaction the crowd had, I had that right there. I was like, what just happened? Because I'd played Third Strike before, but I liked Alex and like Ibuki and stuff like that. But I was like, how did he even do that? What, I had no concept of what a parry even was, outside of like, there was like a little parry mini game when you play Third Strike. But I was like, okay, that's just a thing you do with basketballs, but when you're fighting, you're not thinking about that as a casual. I'd never even thought of it as a defensive option. up until that point. So when I saw that, I was like, I had, and then I was like, wait, so a few things happened. I saw an epic moment in fighting game history, but also it opened up the concept that like, oh, there's people that play like at a high level that I just have no idea about. So Pandora's box was opened. I needed to look up YouTube videos. I need to figure out who this Daigo guy is, who this Justin Wong guy is, right? And this is '08. And then all of a sudden they make an announcement about the Street Fighter 4 coming out, Vanilla Street Fighter 4. And everything looked so epic when it came to, like them announcing it. And I was like, man, we haven't seen a new Street Fighter in years, and this is epic, right? So, me and a few friends, we kind of played it a lot when it came out we saw it come out in '08 at Chinatown Fair. I think in '09, no, I wasn't in New York yet in '08. I was living in Florida at the time, and then in 2009 I moved back to New York. So I linked up with an old friend, and then I got connected to some people, and they tell me about this place called Chinatown Fair. Now they're not competitive either. They're just some regular Bronx dudes, nothing crazy, but they are aware of this place that, hey, you just go to Chinatown, and right down the street from the dumpling spot there's this cool little arcade, and we would go there at random times, and it was like, oh snap, this is cool, right? But then it's like, oh, but there's another version of this arcade where these dudes that really are about these fighting games come out and just destroy everybody that's not at a high level. So yeah, it was I discovered Chinatown Fair that year in '09, and once again, I wasn't really fully invested in fighting games at that point, but I was aware that there's levels to this shit. So I would right, so and I was in my YouTube stuff, so anything that I wanted to learn, I would just started looking up techniques. Honestly, the competitive side of me came out because one of my friends at the time, Gio, he's one of those guys where, I'll give him this credit here. There's people that are naturally talented at something, right? So I'll tell you right now, I'm not naturally talented at fighting games. I have to really work my ass off and do a lot of lab work to feel competent in any fighting game. I don't just come in and go, oh, I get it. I'm maybe now because I have enough experience, but that didn't come from talent. It's just something I had to cultivate over time. But there are people that, hey, they look at fighting games as just another game, and they intuitively kind of put together and figure out, what works, and they're just a little better than average just because it clicks for them. It's that natural gift that they have. So this guy Gio, we would play all these different fighting games, but specifically with Street Fighter 4. I don't know what happened, but I got introduced. Maybe it was hormones, testosterone kicking in. At that time I was I was 18 I was 19. Going on 20, so I'm becoming a young full-fledged adult, and so whenever I would lose to this guy, I would lose a lot, but I would win a good amount of times. But it's that rivalry you have with a homie, but he had this little pretentious air to him, that he's the kind of guy where it's oh, I just want to whip this guy's ass at this game. I would leave his house so salty, and then I would have to go to work. We would sit there playing Street Fighter 4 for hours before I had to go to work. I would show up late sometimes. Some days I'd be like, nah, fuck it. But he would make me so salty that it motivated me to learn the game at a different level. And it was all so I'm telling you right now, part of my origin of why I even wanted to get good at Street Fighter 4 was because I was so salty that I was just like, nah, I need to learn every technique to beat this guy, right?
That's incredible. Like you would think that there are ways to get good in the game, but man, fueled by salt to really get good in the game. I mean, not saying it's not common, but the way how you describe it is very rare. So that's pretty awesome, though.
And it's rare for me too, because you know me, I'm not that kind of guy. I'm not a guy that like gets really salty ever. You know, I'm a pretty chill dude. I like to laugh, I like to have fun. So the last emotion I like to feel is any form of like anger or aggression, but he would bring it out of me. So what I would do is I would look up YouTube videos. I would learn about like different techniques in like, you know, Third Strike. I was studying that game so that when 4 came out, you know, I mean, there was a lot of like techniques that would carry over. And then I would learn about techniques in 4. I started learning about like that was at that time. This is, like I said, 2009 into 2010 maybe. I see people, you know, I'm watching these tournament videos, and I see people playing on these controllers that they're not just regular controllers. It's like these little arcade sticks that they took out of the like arcade cabinet, and you just put it on your lap. I'm like, yo, you know. So I was like, oh snap, I gotta get me one of those, because if I go to Chinatown Fair, then I'm gonna need to learn how to play on that, you know, 6-8 button format. So that's when I started learning about, you know, fighting, you know, fight sticks and, you know, arcade sticks and whatnot. And, you know, so I got a cheap one at the time. Like, I think I went to Best Buy, and there was like, I think Tekken 6 was on sale, and it came with like with a wireless Tekken 6 like arcade stick.
Oh, yeah, I remember that stick.
And it came with the art book. Like, I got the game, the art book, and the stick. I got that all on sale for like $40 or something like that, maybe even less, maybe $30. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna use that and like learn how to like do these different techniques. Obviously not the best, right? I mean, it's wireless and it's not built with the best parts, so you know, like it's more of a detriment than a benefit. But it did, you know, I was able to try to learn different techniques like plinking, for example, and you know, and different things like that. So I was trying to do everything to do research to, you know, use these techniques that would improve my performance. Obviously, not knowing the fundamentals of like fighting games, this is just like, hey, what techniques do I learn to improve my execution, so that then I could do combos and stuff. And I think for me, a good bar for where I was like growing was how far into the combo trials could I get in Street Fighter 4 with a given character. Because, you know, if at low level at that time, if you were able to go all the way up to, you know, combo trial 30 for a given character, that's when, you know, at that time combo 30 was they called it like the Daigo combo, where it's like, oh, you do FADC in the Ultra. That was almost an impossible technique that I couldn't even conceive how one would do it. So whenever someone would do it, I don't know if you remember at the time, but like early Street Fighter 4 days, if you did any FADC, like Shoryuken FADC Ultra, they're like, oh, this dude's trying to be Daigo.
Oh yeah, the stigma was pretty real back then. Because a lot of folks were like, man, this guy is trying so hard to be like Daigo, but you'll never be Daigo and all that kind of stuff. It was like, it was kind of crazy in terms of that. Like, people were talking real nonsense back then, because I felt like, I mean, don't get me wrong, like the Japanese fighters were like, yeah, they were the shit. Yeah. But it's like, you know, we had our good plethora of players that could compete with them and everything. So you know, part of me didn't really understand what was the whole, you know, writing in terms of that, but.
Yeah, I mean, and at the time, it's funny because it was only specific to if you did it with Ryu. If you did Shoryuken FADC Ultra, then, oh, you're trying to be Daigo. But let's say, for example, you played Sagat and you did, you know, like uppercut FADC, like forward heavy kick Ultra. They didn't say, oh, you're trying to be Mago. No, they just they just let you rock. And the funny thing is, it's like doing those combos, like they weren't. It's not to say they weren't optimal. They were, because Ultra was very powerful for a while before they started scaling the damage over time. But there's plenty of optimal combos outside of Ultra, and so it's just weird, like the perspective, which is funny in hindsight, because you like it was almost as if to say you doing the most optimal combo in a given scenario means you're trying to be like this godlike Japanese player. It's like, well, in retrospect, yeah, I mean, if I do the things if I can do the techniques they can do, that means that I can become as good as them. But there was I think there was like a sentiment at the time that, like, the Japanese players were untouchable. So it's almost like everybody was downing each other because of like, oh well, you're not going to beat the Japanese anyway. So so it was pretty weird. It took a long time, and it took people like Sanford and so on and so forth to go like, they're human, like, you know what I mean? But you even to this day, you still got people that look at the Japanese and go, nah, like, they're so godlike. It's just like, yeah, well, if we just take what they're doing and apply it, then we'll be godlike too. That's how that works.
Not to cut you off though.
No, do you think?
So the funny thing about that is, I don't know. Like, we tried. I remember, like, there were a couple of tournaments that the top players were trying to help out the lower level players. Like, I got a good example. Like, I remember one year where myself and the chef went to a pie event, right? Where they were trying to say, okay, they're trying to stop the whole stigma of gatekeeping. Right. And basically be like, okay, let's talk with the other the intermediate, the low level players in terms of how helping them to get up and everything. And then I remember, like, there were people like Dominion, there was Smug, there was like Chin. Lud was there. There was a bunch of people that was there.
Sheesh! What a list!
It was a bunch of people that was at that event. Sanford was there too, and they were like trying to talk, in terms of teaching lower levels to play or higher levels and see what they went wrong and everything like that. And I feel like one of the biggest issues with why the U.S. is, I feel like we can, but we can't. I mean, the main reason, one of the main reasons is this country's too big. That's one thing, and everything is like kind of split up into everywhere. So it's like sure. we have. So I would say like we have our regions, and regions are kind of divided into, obviously the states. Each state has their own version of the FGC. And then within the state, you have these cities where also have their version of the FGC inside there. So it's like the traveling was always the issue because it was so massive. While Japan, it's basically one island where you can just travel by the goddamn bullet train, where it goes over 200 miles per hour, and then you can easily just get there within an hour or something like that. Things like that, you can easily just do so. But
yeah, for sure.
I would say, like, it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy. It's doable, but it's not easy. That's the thing.
Yeah, and it's just one of those things where, I mean, not to get too deep into it, but a lot of American culture is always us versus them mentality. Yeah. But we do it with ourselves before we do it with anyone else, and that's what ends up being a problem, right? So one of the big things that happened in American culture, right, that really separated the East versus the West, right, was Pac versus Biggie, right? Yeah. So I feel like this is like in the 90s heading into the early 2000s, and after that whole rap beef ends in a tragedy, you forever have this splinter of like East versus West Coast in many different avenues, and gaming is no different, right? Especially in fighting games. So you had this like very much East Coast versus West Coast mentality just in tournament, where it's like, oh, it's us versus them. And then, I mean, the East Coast mentality, especially in the New York mentality, it's a lot of there's a lot of ego and bravado in terms of like, oh, I want to be the best, just me, right? So I'll say it like this: there was a lot of Kendricks for a while, even just in the New York side of the FGC, where it's like, there ain't no big three, there's just big me. So that's how New York is. Like, like people, they want to be that, they want to be the guy. They don't really want to share the spotlight because it's nice that we're all nice in this area. Like, if everybody's good at the game, cool, but I'm trying to be the dude, you know what I mean? So then what ends up happening is, as soon as you become that guy, then you leave for opportunity, and no one's gonna say, oh, you should stick around and not take advantage of any opportunity. You should. It's just kind of what happens. So an example, like the biggest example you could think of, right? Justin Wong, right? He's that dude from he is the New York star, and he becomes bigger. And I think that just happens at all levels, right? You, like, let's say like a Kanye, for example. He's a Chicago rapper, and then he gets big enough to the point where he's not known as the, like, no one says, oh, Kanye West from Chicago. He is just Kanye West. He is that guy. And you kind of the more success you gain, the less you identify with where you're from, and it's more like it just happens that way. So yeah, I'm not gonna blame a Justin Wong for like, oh, why did you leave New York and not try to help anybody else grow? He's supposed to, grow as a person and try to, establish himself if he wants to. Now you have whoever sticks around, you have a choice, right? It's like, well, how do we get the next Justin Wong to, like, in this area, right? Because I feel like a big decline in the New York scene was like, when you don't have like a consistent roster of people that can really fight against like the different regions, then the strength, like the overall power levels go down. Not to say, and I'm saying all this like, who am I, right? You know what I mean? There's a reason that nobody knows who I am. But it's just hard not to notice when your region is like on a decline, when other regions are, they have their power players, and then they cultivate from within and try to grow from that area. So I think we're starting to do it a little more so these days. It's a little easier to be a little more interconnected, but there is it's hard to circumvent the whole like issue of us being such a huge country, because like you said, we're too big. I feel like a good quote I've been hearing recently is we're too big to succeed. Like it's very hard to get everyone from every part of the US to come together like the Avengers and go, yo, let's take out like the top regions. You know what I mean? It's not easy.
I see. Well, that's pretty much a fascinating story. Very fascinating. It's very in-depth as well, too.
Yeah.
Now tell me, right? Now that you sort of explained in terms of how you became from casual to competitor, I'm pretty sure I know we kind of answered your question in terms of, which game you started out with to be competitive with. Tell me something. Let's talk about your tournament experiences. Now, what was your first tournament that you went to, and then afterwards, what else did you go to afterwards?
Okay, so before I get into that, one last thing I want to mention about I think I mentioned all the way up into a point where I started being aware of the competitive scene, but the person who truly pushed me to actually take it more seriously was actually my life partner, my lady, Remy. I met my girlfriend, who's now is pretty much my wife at this point. We have a kid together. I met her at a job that I had at the time, and we actually started officially dating in 2013. And I would talk to her about this fighting game stuff, and I kind of asked her, I was like, I think she asked me because she saw how passionate I was about it, and she tells me, hey, so why don't you, hey, you have that 8-bit place that you could go to, right? I was like, yeah. And she's like, why don't you go there consistently, like every week? Because I met Brandon, I actually met him when I got to college here, through it was like the game room of our college, and he was part of like a video game / anime club. I kind of just went in there and saw him playing with other people. We got cool, and then I met you guys, the rest of the 8-bit guys, through Brandon. He was the true connection. But Remy was like, why don't you, hey, you know Brandon, why don't you go with him to this 8-bit place every Sunday? They do this thing every Sunday, right? Why don't you go? So she actually, shout out to the wifey, she really actually motivated me to keep on with it, and I love her for it. But yeah, so in terms of the first tournament that I went to, right? So I think one of the first tournaments that I actually ever went to, it might have been like a random tournament in Long Island. Do you remember the one?
Mm-hmm. I think that was it was that game store that was there. I remember that tournament. I remember that one. Yeah.
So Li Joe, he ran a tournament out there, and we went there for Ultra Street Fighter 4. I actually didn't do half bad. I think I went 2-2 at that tournament. But that was honestly probably the first one I ever went to, and then the first major that I went to was probably a year or two after that. It was an NEC tournament. I don't remember which one exactly. But that was the first major tournament I went to, was NEC, and I didn't do very well there. But funny enough, I don't know if you guys know who Scamby is. He's a player that he goes to bums tournaments.
Yeah.
He's been going there. He had his start in Marvel 3. And I was aware of him at the time because Marvel 3 at Bum's house was like pretty prolific at the time. So I was aware of who he was, and then I go to this NEC tournament, and this Scamby guy he's running my pool. And I was like, oh snap, but like it was pretty cool or whatever. And it was just another one of those moments that I'll never forget, where I went into I think I lost my first match, obviously. And then the very next match I had, I pulled out I got nice and comfortable, and I pulled out all the DiCaprio tricks. I was zooping around, zip zapping. I had all my mix-ups intact, BMBs on lock, hitting stuns. So I was really flowing in that second match. And Scamby, he asked me, hey, what was the score, and blah blah blah. And he had actually been watching, and he was like, yo, that match is like, you're actually like, you're actually mad good, man. You should keep it up. And I think that was the first time that someone that I knew of in the scene, outside of my peers, saw what I did and gave me props on what he saw. And it was a huge deal for me, because it was the first major that I went to, and it was like just any little bit of recognition was like meant everything to me, because in my eyes, like, a lot of the people that go to these tournaments, I used to just look up to them. Like I would just see them like in random streams and tournaments every week. So any one of them who would give me props was the best thing I could hear. So yeah, that was like the first two tournaments I went to. I was kind of like, honestly haven't gone to a lot of tournaments in my day, outside of just random like meetups here or there. And then I think the next major that I went to after that was it was that Defend the North, the one that happened before COVID. That it was like the first Defend the North that they held in the city. Actually, I think I went to a Defender North before that when it was like upstate actually.
So we went to the one that was in White Plains.
Yeah.
And you went to the one that was this was way before COVID actually. This was the one that was in Flushing in Queens.
Yes.
That was the
I went to that one?
Yes, you did. Because you were with I think you were with myself. Mm-hmm. We had myself, David Bunch, and Jay Dragonettes in the room.
Right. Okay, yeah. So I did go to that one. Oh, wow. I didn't realize that was Flushing. Yeah. Look, when we went to these tournaments, I was like, I don't know where it's at. I just I go with y'all. Y'all take me where I need to go. I was like, I forget about where I think I'm at. But yeah, so we went to that one.
Yeah. We also went to Winter Brawl as well. If you remember, that was the one that we had taken that big group picture of majority of the 8-bit guys.
So I'm confusing things. So I never went to NEC then. I think I went to. I think it was Winter Brawl.
Actually, no. I'm sorry. That was NEC. That was NEC because I remember because it was the time the Christmas tree was up. We were posed by the Christmas tree, so it was definitely NEC, and that's when we had that huge group picture. I think we were like, how many cars deep? I think we were like 2 cars deep that time.
I think it actually might have been 3.
It might have been 3.
It was your car, it was Brandon's car, and it was Reg's car.
Yes, that's right. It was 3. It was 3 of us. That's right. So it was like we were rolling deep during that time. Yes,
for sure.
But yeah.
So then I think the last major that I went to after that, Defender North, was the one in the city, and I haven't gone to one since because things changed for me in my trajectory. Like in 2016, I got me and my girl. We got pregnant and we had our son in 2017. Shout outs to Jericho Maysonet, the prodigal son.
Yeah.
But yeah. So when I became a dad, like everything changed. So I had to take a step back. A little bit. Like I always kept up with fighting games, but I couldn't play as much as I wanted to. But then one game that I could keep up with because I had a Switch was Dragon Ball FighterZ. So I was big on that for a little while. So when I went to Defend the North, that's what I went for primarily. And I think that was the best performance I had done. I got far enough to get on stream, and then I got bodied because my controller issues and just getting generally destroyed because of it. But I think at that tournament I was might have gone 4-2 actually. So I went farther than I'd ever gone in any tournament, which told me that I can, I have what it takes if I just put in the work. But life happened, and I became a father. So I just really, one of the things that as much as I love fighting games, like the last thing I would want to do is neglect my son because of it. So I always try to strike that balance. I always had the balance in mind. So I always make sure they're good first, the wife and kid, and then if they're good, then if I have it's all about scheduling. You know what I mean? Like if I could schedule it ahead enough in time, and I can make it work, then I'll try to make it to another tournament. It's been long overdue for me for sure. So, but I've been living the dad life.
So I would say that we could keep a short answer with this one. You would consider yourself still competitive in a way, right?
I'm competitive in terms of I'll say I like to stay in the competitive mindset in terms of like conversations of meta, of just game theory, and like the philosophy of the game itself, right? So I like to be involved in the conversation on an intellectual level, because while I don't have a lot of opportunities to travel out and compete, I do try to stay in the conversation. So on paper, no, I'm not actually competitive, but I like to maintain that competitive mindset so I could stay sharp. And when I do find the time to become competitive, like I won't be out of shape in any way, shape, or form. And a big part of that is just keeping in touch with like the core group that we have, where you guys are always trying to stay at the top of your game. So if I try to stay with that same wavelength of thought, then we'll always have a competitive mindset. So I'll say that.
I appreciate that. I mean, we did. I mean, I would say you are definitely one of the smarter people in our core group. I would call you more of the philosopher, because the way how you really look at the game on a philosophy level is pretty astounding, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And the way how you just go about it also is very, it relates to like how a player should look into it from the outside in. And basically you give like these thoughts about it, and it's very intriguing in terms of how you go about it by thinking about it. So that's what I appreciate the most about you, honestly, because of that reason. So
appreciate that.
Anytime. Yeah. So, all right, let me ask you something, right? Let me ask you about the FGC, right? I'm gonna give you a two-part question, right?
All right, go for it.
I want to know. This is part one. I want to know, what are your thoughts of the current state of the FGC, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I want you to tell me, what do you think? How would you think the FGC will evolve in the next 5 years?
So, I would say if I had to really, I'm going with my gut here, shooting from the chamber. The first word that comes to my mind is fragmented, and I think the reason for that is because of the internet, right? I think something fundamentally changed about the FGC after COVID, where we're all forced to be indoors, where it eliminated, and I think this is true for just about a lot of different facets of society, right? It's like, why would I go outside when I can, get that same level of, meetup inside, right? Like we could just get into this Discord and just like hang out digitally, right? So I think that's just a sign of the times. Excuse me. I think it's a sign of the times where the reason we're fragmented, ironically, is because we're so connected, or at least there's such an easy ability to connect on the surface, right? Because you would think with all these online platforms and ways to connect, we'd actually be more connected than ever. But I think what happens is actually the opposite, because it's so easy to connect with people online, people are less prone to like feel the urge to do it. You know what I'm saying? Like hardness, what was that saying? I'm messing up the phrase. Something makes the heart go fonder. You know what I mean? Basically when you miss someone, that's when you miss something, or you miss someone, that's what makes you more motivated to want to see them, right? So if because we're all so connected, there's no urge to want to come out to these things, right? So that's why, and a big, no disrespect to NLBC, like they're a long-standing staple of the fighting game community, East Coast, and especially New York. But there's a reason that like NLBC used to be one of the biggest streamed sites, aside from the fact that Team Spooky, Spooky stopped streaming from there. But there's a reason that NLBC streaming numbers are low compared to TNS, for example, right? Where a lot more people from different regions can compete, instead of just, I have to be on the East Coast to play at NLBC. I gotta be on the West Coast to play at WNF. No, it's like, well, if you have a good connection, then you're good to go with us here at TNS. You know what I'm saying? So, like, what ends up happening is, because there's no need to be centralized, right? You don't have to attach yourself to being an East Coast player. You don't have to attach yourself to being a West Coast. I mean, you can, and that's nice if you have a local meetup. And I'll say this to everybody listening: support your locals. Like, don't. It's awesome to just play games online and play ranked and whatnot, but there's just something special about the meetup. Just get out there, whatever your local, gaming lounge, whatever the case is. If you can find a few people to meet up with and go somewhere to do that, then definitely do. It's very fulfilling. It's how I met some of my best friends, and definitely what motivated me to continue on this fighting game competitive journey. But with that being said, online tournaments have become a lot more the norm. So, if for a lot of players, on top of the fact that online tournaments are the norm, because the fighting game community is so niche, in terms of how you it's not very, to be honest, unless you're one of the highest level players in the game, it doesn't pay a lot to play and be competitive, right? Unless you're winning the tournaments, it's not a sustainable thing, which is why me and my small group, we're adults. I don't need fighting games to sustain myself, right? I would definitely not bet my livelihood on fighting games if I wasn't absolutely sure that I could dominate and make it sustainable. Now, the only other way to make fighting games any bit profitable is if you do content creation, right? There's a lot of money that can be made if you're just generally a YouTube or a Twitch streamer, right? So because of that, you noticed a shift in the FGC culture where every top player also is probably some of the most viewed content creators in the space, right? Brian F, super solid player, but he's also one of the most viewed FGC content creators in the space, right? Punk, arguably best in America, one of the best in the world, but he also has a YouTube channel for content creation, and the list goes on and on, right? So I think a lot of especially if you're not sponsored, you kind of have to create a sustainable content creation model so that you can make money if you're not making money from tournament, because tournaments, whenever they do come around, it's a great payout if you win, but it's diminishing returns based off of what you're investing into it. So you gotta make it work for you somehow, and content creation is the way to go for that. So because of things like that, that's the direction that we've been heading towards. And I mean, what ends up happening is a lot of the fighting game community is slowly, it's actually been getting better, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. It's been rocky in the last few years, but what ends up happening is it becomes a little less about who's the best and more about who's more popular. And me personally, my relationship with the fighting game community, it's, for a long time I felt to be honest, it's a lot of high school popularity contest mentality, and that's just my experience. That could be different for anyone, but for a long time before I found my guys at 8-bit, it was not easy to just go. I'll tell you this, and you could agree to disagree, but if you were a nobody, you are not just going to go into Chinatown Fair and have someone show you the ropes. You might bump into some dude that's not an asshole who will play you, but he's just going to whoop your ass, and he's not going to tell you where you went wrong, because guess what? He also wants to win, right? So that's how it was back then. And then if you were in the know, then you would just start, seeing, not to, excuse my potty mouth, but you would see, this was back before Dick Ryder wasn't a catchy internet buzzword, but there was some actual dick riders that would like, oh, if you weren't like the highest level player, then oh, who's that guy? Forget about him. Oh, but look, look who just came in the room. Let me try to talk to this person. Yo, what's up, man? How's it going? How you doing? And it's just like, bruh, what? Like, if you stopped trying to suck up to, and brown nose to all the high level players, you could just try to get on their level by being good. And hey, what, you don't know if you're gonna bump into the next Justin Wong, but guess what, you just pretty much ignored him because you were looking the other way. And then guess what, when that unknown person becomes the next big guy in your scene, now you're trying to suck up to them, and the cycle continues, and that shit is gross. I never liked it. And it's like the same thing happens with social media, because then these players create a following, and then it's a big old what's the term, it's I'm trying to think of it, it's the cult of personality is what it is, right? So you'll that's why the bigger the ego, the bigger the cult of personality. Is why you'll see Punk get into a lot of online, because he'll say things, and then you got people that are super Punk fanboys, and it all feeds into it's a weird thing. But guess what? I mean, at least Punk can back it up, right? Not a lot of people can. And it was a funny thing. I'm all over the place, so bear with me here. But it was a funny thing because during COVID, I saw a lot of people during Street Fighter V towards the tail end. I saw a lot of content creators that I'm like, I'm not really anybody who's notable, but I'm very aware of the movers and shakers in the scene. So I would see people, start gaining prominence through content creation and online tournaments, and I'm like, who's this guy, right? And then as soon as the travel bans and the COVID regulations started easing up, and then it made tournaments like IRL possible, suddenly you saw all these people who were just trying to act like they were better than everybody else because I guess because they were popular online, and you started seeing them getting washed in tournament, and it's just like, oh, that's interesting. So I guess it was less about your, how good you were, and more about how popular you were. But I think people are seeing the light a little more so now. I don't want to say that's still true. I think a lot of players now understand the value of being good online, and then you see a lot of it carry over offline too. So I'm not mad at it. I think it's getting a little better, but it's still, I don't know, it's I think something changed at that point, and being a content creator or an influencer kind of infected the FGC a little bit, and kind of made things a big popularity contest instead of just yo, who's nice. Because then what ends up happening there is, once you are known as being a personality, then you get popular enough, and then you start thinking, oh, let me start sharing my opinions, and then if people don't agree with you, then it's a problem. And you got shout outs to Mena RD. He's one of those guys where he's another one where the proof is in the pudding. He doesn't really, me personally, I don't think Mena is one of those guys where he talks crap about anyone a lot. He just has his issues with the game, but it'll be backed by his experience. I mean, how are you going to tell Mena, who's won the most insane amount of tournaments in 6 already, how are you going to tell him what he should or shouldn't think about the game, right? It is what it is. But he's pretty fair, and honestly, he's one of those guys where if someone else has a irrational complaint about the game, he's quick to try to point people in the right direction, because he's one of the few, I think I look to him as that's the kind of player that I would love to see more of in the scene, is people who are actually super the best of the best, who are also trying to bring their regions up with him. He was one of the first people that I started seeing the conversation come back of yo, if we all in NA, he's talking about all of North America, it's oh, if we all come together and really grind it out, then we could really like have a actual chance of beating the Japanese. And then you have your people like Zaffarino, same thing, right? It's like, yo, if we all come together and like, you know, play each other, like, and I look to Zaffarino as well as one of those intellectuals and philosophers in the scene where it's like he has an ability to communicate key concepts of the game. And you know, he would just love to rally more pros to come together. Like, I feel like people like Mena and people like Zaffarino, like they're the kind of people that they would want to build like a united nations of like people in the scene. And it's like, yo, let's all come together, fucking brainstorm, think tank it out so that we can, you know, come out to these tournaments and wreck house. But a lot of people got egos and they just want to do it for themselves, and that's the sucky thing that I've been seeing for the last few years, and it hasn't really changed much. So where do I see it going in the next 5 years? I mean, I'll say this: in the next 5 years, the trend, the thing that people are mad about, especially legacy players, is they don't like simplified mechanics, right? That's like, they hate that. They don't like the fact that like, oh, you know, all these consistent things in past games that mitigated like, you know, variable factors are now thrown out the window. It's like, yeah, the new games, they want you to play aggressively because it's funner, it's more fun to watch, and they want to put you in scenarios that aren't consistent because, you know, variety is the spice of life. But then in reality, it's like, is it variety or is it that you know, put in these universal mechanics that are, you know, pretty toxically one-sided, right? Shout outs to Drive Rush. But it's one of those things where it's not, I don't think the trend is gonna change very much. I think the trajectory of fighting games themselves, it's kind of like a pendulum swinging. It always goes far in one direction and then it comes back the other way. So I think there's gonna be more games that come out that try to cater to the casual audience. I think you have to if you want to make any money. And if anybody thinks that making a game more difficult because, you know, it makes people feel gratified for getting good in it, if you think that's good for you at high level, so then, you know, if you want, we can make a really difficult, like high level, you know, game where only high level elite players could circle jerk and just play each other, and it could be a commercial flop that no one actually wants to play. Meanwhile, you got, you know, 13-year-old kids playing Fortnite because there's colors and you could build shit and it's cool to play. Like, say what you want, but if you want your game to survive and actually be popular, if you want to see it on the main screen, if you want investors, if you want people to pump money into the scene, you gotta make it casual friendly and you got to make it spectator friendly, because you want money from people watching and you want money from people buying the product, and there's no way you're going to do that if you cater to only the elite level players. It's just common sense. There's no way around it. Look, I love Street Fighter 4 like everyone else does, I promise you. You know, once I figured out how to do FADC, I felt like I was a big boy, you know what I mean? But it's just not but it's just not how games are gonna go. Now they might but it kind of happened with 6, right? They're always, at least I see a trend, especially for Street Fighter, but in Street Fighter 6 where it was pretty much an answer to all of the problems people had with 5, and I at least see that as like, okay, they are listening and they're trying to do something to, you know, strike a decent middle ground between the casuals and like the diehard fans, right? So I think we'll see a little bit more of that. I'll tell you one thing though, I think 2XKO is going to change the game, because it's going to bring a lot of people not in fighting games, and it's got a pretty entry level like simplification where it's like, it is the tried and true, you know, easy to play, difficult to master. Because it has like Smash inputs mixed in with like Marvel inputs. Like, people love Marvel, and a lot of people, whether you think it's a fighting game or not, a whole lot of people love Smash. And why did they love Smash? Because it's a bunch of like recognizable characters all playing together in a pretty simplified game. But that's also, look, I'm not going to jump into Smash tomorrow and just whip everybody's ass because I'm a Street Fighter player. But I'm seeing a trend of Smash players that come into Street Fighter spaces and start murking people here. So it's like, it is what it is. It's just a sign of the times. And I think in the next 5 years, there's going to be a lot more people entering, and a lot of faces that you've probably never heard of rise to prominence. And it's going to be something where, hey, if you're an OG, you either get with the times or you get lost in the annals of history. I feel like it's going to be something like that because you're seeing it already. Anyone that's like, kind of saying, "Oh, I don't like the new stuff," they're going home to be family men. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so you have to. I try to embrace the Japanese mentality, which is, in my opinion, is just my perspective. But in my view, they take the game as it is. Now, I'm saying that, and I hated 5. I did not like the game. But obviously, you have to like the game to want to get good at it. So once you like the game, then the next step, getting good at it, you have to accept what is. And that, that comes with everything in life, right? It's like you got to accept the scenario as it is and, do your best to get, to improve yourself from that scenario. So I think within the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot more, maybe even like younger talent come in, and you're going to see probably an explosion of people from 2XKO and games like that, because look, 2XKO, that's going to, as far as I understand, that game is going to be free.
Yep.
So it's like, hey, you know what people like? People like free. So you're going to see a huge explosion there, and it's going to change the way that we even look at how a fighting game should be implemented and monetized. And you know what I mean? So it's gonna bring a lot of eyeballs. And you have Riot on the scene, so it's like, hey, you're going to see a lot of money being pumped into 2XKO, and it's gonna be a lot of attention brought into the scene that way. Do I think it's gonna be, it's gonna revolutionize and put fighting games back on the map? We'll have to see. But I think that 2XKO is the future, and we'll see. I'll say in the next 5 years, it might even be, I would dare say, might even be dictated by the success or the trajectory of 2XKO, because they are going to change how developers, how everyone looks at how a fighting game should be made and implemented, and it's going to bring a lot more different personalities into the space that change the way even content creation works with that, and so on and so forth. So it's going to be a lot of changes, and I think 2XKO is going to be a big shift in how we see things in the scene.
I see. So you have a lot of faith in 2XKO. But, I mean,
I wouldn't call it faith. I'll say because, hey, at the end of the day, if the game sucks, it's game over, right? But the game looks good, and it looks like it plays good, and a lot of the people trying out the game. And look, here's the thing: if you have a developer that's known for having a strong communication with the player base, then the sky's the limit, right? So it might not suck. It might not be good at the launch, but it'll get good, and then it's free. So it's just where people are always going to go where the money's at, and you're going to see a lot of people randomly play 2XKO, if only just to play it early on, and then let that algo hit them on the YouTubes and Twitch, and then maybe they'll go back to their Street Fighters and whatnot. Maybe they won't. We'll see.
I see what you're saying. Well, that's pretty interesting. That's pretty interesting what you're saying with that. So, I mean, I am looking forward to 2XKO myself. So we will definitely see. So I am actually very interested to see how that goes.
Yeah, and also I want to say this as well. Like, you've done such an amazing job with with the the classic scene with ST and all that, where I feel like now more than ever, yes, there's gonna be games that change how we, even see fighting games from here on out in the future. But if you like a game, and like no matter what era of game you like, if you like Third Strike, you like Street Fighter 4, I see even a small scene for Street Fighter Cross Tekken and stuff like that. No, there's no better time than ever to like promote whatever small scene that you have that you want to look. At the end of the day, if you build it, they will come. And I think people like watching different scenes be represented in a dynamic way. You just got to be entertaining. So games are going to change, and for a more casual audience to get the numbers. But if you don't like it, then just play the game you do like and just rep that scene. Keep it growing.
The classic. Well, it's pretty much the classic. Play what you like. That's exactly how it goes.
Absolutely. I don't think anybody should be playing a game that they don't like to what end? Because it always translates in terms of, especially when it comes to streaming and whatnot. If you're not passionate about something that you're doing, everyone knows it. You're just sitting there like playing, and you don't really like what's happening. But hey, what would you rather see? Would you rather see someone really enjoy a game that doesn't have a lot of viewership, or watch someone with a lot of viewership just like hate a game? It's just like you don't want to see that. So shout outs to people like Bum, even, who like run tournaments for games he wants to run them for, and you just see the passion. And it might not have like a huge amount of viewership, but when he is passionate about something, like the content is there. You just gotta keep on going the course.
Absolutely. I mean, yep, and shout outs to Bum, man, it's really keeping alive the DBZF scene and everything.
Yeah.
And he's a clear example of grassroots alongside myself. So that is pretty sick with them. All right. So now that we got that out of the way, right? Let's talk about something major, and then we'll get it to the end, right? Let's talk about how do you approach the newer games. So I want you to tell me in your own words, how did you approach 6?
So the way I approached 6, I was very fortunate to get into pretty much every beta. I mean, obviously you got into the first one, then you're into the next one automatically. I'm not gonna lie, I did get the cracked beta. That's what I did.
There's nothing to shy away with that, because there's everybody. You remember the time where everybody was like, head over heels about people had the cracked beta and all that stuff. The way I see it is, hey, if it's available, it's available. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
It's not folks' fault in terms of that. So it is what it is. But
yeah, so I played the cracked beta. I didn't play it a whole lot, but I played it enough because I just wanted to get a very early fundamental understanding of the game. And the way that I approach it is I approach it a little differently than how most people start a game, because it's, for me personally, I do not learn anything by just getting smacked up. There's people that like they have their fundamentals, so they're like, oh yeah, I'll just come in and just start hitting low forward into fireball, or low forward into like 2-piece combo, and I'll just learn footsies. And I was like, I actually don't start 100% with footsies. Obviously I learned the ranges of first off, step 1 for me is the character select screen. I go, who do I like? I don't pick the character that I think is, this character is gonna be good, or they solve X amount of problems of the game, so let me pick the strong character. If the character that I pick happens to be strong, so be it. I'll probably figure out why my character is strong and emphasize it. But usually I start off by picking who I like. Once I figure that out, then I go, okay, let's figure out like their normal. So I enter the lab. I don't even start playing any type of game with anyone unless I've labbed probably for a day or two, to be honest. I don't really play until I've got a full grasp of how I think the game should work for me. So I spend a day or two. I figure out every normal. I figure out like more or less the properties, and then I start to build an idea of the function, because I look at every piece of a character's toolkit, and instead of looking at the tool and going, oh, the tool sucks, everything in the fighting game is by design. Every mechanic, every character, every button is made by design. So instead of being, upset about how the button doesn't work the way I think it should work, I let go of that notion and I just go, what is this button good for? What are these buttons good for? What are these specials good for? And that gives me, it kind of tells me the story of like, oh, okay, I'll start to form an idea of, okay, so all of this character's tools tell me that this is the best way to play them because that's how the tools are strong. So I don't like to look at a game or a character based off of their weaknesses or what I want to change. I try to look at what's good and try to maximize for efficiency out of the strengths instead of the weaknesses, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
So I look at the tools of the character that I like and I go, why is it good? And then obviously you do want to acknowledge why it's bad so that you kind of figure out what not to do with that tool, right? So that's all you're doing. That's all I try to do. I just look at the tools and I try to figure out what's bad. I try to look at the pros and cons, and I try to stay away from the cons, try to reduce the scenarios that promote the cons and increase the scenarios that promote the pros. And that's how I end up finding out, I start getting ideas, right? And the ideas will pop up where it's like, oh, okay, well, this thing seems actually really strong if and that's when you want to look into things like, frame data, see how things work in like on hit, on block. And then you start to see, hey, if I use this specific tool this way, then it's actually something that no one cares about is actually like pretty damn good. What I also try to do is there's a lot of lab monsters that go like so far off the deep end that they become those mad scientists that like, create tech that has no function or purpose. It's just like, and you know what I'm talking about, right? So it's like you see these like not to be too disrespectful, but it's these wannabe tech, these tech monsters that they come up with shit that no one's gonna use and has no function outside of like the competitive level because they're so specific. And yes, you want to leave room for those because hey, they could be your signature. I've seen plenty of people who create an entire style based off of like just having an unorthodox way of playing a character. There's nothing wrong with that, but I try to strike a balance between like the unorthodox and like just consistency and things that are real. Though my mentality is I want to find very unique and underutilized strategies that are real, right? So that's where lab experimentation and application, right? And really, I mean, ultimately, if I had to summarize how I look at things, it's really just using the scientific method, right? You want to go through all the steps, you have a hypothesis, you do experiments, and then you try to apply it, and if it doesn't work, you fucking get rid of the shit. All right, you don't need to keep anything that ain't working. But if you really feel like it could work, well, you have to ask yourself, well, how many times is this scenario going to actually come up? And that's where you have to have that philosophical mindset where not only are you running tangible like experiments and application, but you also want to think of things in the philosophical way, right? It's like, okay, let's I think you've probably heard me call them this, but like, let's do a thought experiment, right? So I like to do these theory crafting experiments where I create a scenario on paper and I go, okay, so this technique that I want to use, realistically, how often is this thing going to happen, and how would that scenario actually play out even in that scenario that I'm generating, right? Because there's a way that you want something to work, and then there's the way that it will work. So there is merit in having very unique strategies, if the scenario calls for it, right? I mean, some of the highest level players of all time have pulled shit out of their back pocket where you're like, yo, I didn't even know about that. Now they know that that specific thing might work because, hey, they know the parameters and they're so sure of the scenario happening that they go, I have the exact thing, I have the exact tool, the exact strategy to beat that no one's ever seen before. And I think that's dope. But do they do that all the time? No. So there is a time and a place for every strategy, but I like to find things that, honestly, I try to find things that are like, really strong that I could maybe even abuse, because the way I try to account for all variables in a lot of situations and figure out, if I have a certain strategy, what can the opponent effectively do to counter it? And if I can run the simulation and I find that, hey, even in a situation where it doesn't work out, it's still viable, then that becomes a part of my, my strategy. And I kind of just keep going from there.
I see. Well, that was very thought out. So, and that's why I said you're totally like the philosopher. To be honest with you, you're very thought out with your approach. So that's what I respect the most about you as a player, and as pretty much a close friend. You're definitely like, you are very well thought in terms of how to approach a situation, and I think you use that situation into games also. So I totally appreciate that about you. So
yeah, and I'm not a rapper.
No, you're not. You're not a rapper.
No,
I mean you can be, but I think you could be that.
yeah, arguably, we'll see. Yeah.
Arguably, yeah. So right now, I think we are towards the end, right? I think my last question to you is: I know for a fact that you've been streaming like here and there, right? And you haven't. I know you haven't been streaming as much because I know you've been pretty busy and everything like that. But if you were to say, in terms of you're using your streams to reach out to people and show them, you're reaching out to people and show them what you want, right? Mm-hmm. What is the message that you are sending to the newer people that's coming into the scene or so? What kind of message would you send them?
So my message, I kind of look to Maximilian. Shout outs to him. He was one of arguably the first best content creator in fighting games, just in terms of broad appeal, presentation, and just overall message. And really the message is, hey, fighting games are fun, and honestly, a lot of what makes a lot of different genres great came from fighting games. So my message would be fighting games are fun, that's really how far I've gotten in that thought process. A lot of the times fighting games are fun, and yeah, you could learn it too if you want to, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I would say that is the simplest version of that, and I kind of just want to show more people how, what's a good way of thinking about things, because I think in our bubble, in our little group, we definitely know that learning fighting games can also teach you a lot about how to handle things in life. There's a lot of things that could transfer and correlate over into the real world. Fighting games ultimately are about risk management, right? And like many things in life, you take a big risk and you might get a big reward, right? So I think there's a lot to learn from fighting games, and I think they're just cool as shit, and I just want more people to play them.
That's good. I mean, so basically your message is really just tell people, hey, just come in and just play and have a good time. And then
Yeah,
I would say, and then I would say like that's very. I like that message, honestly, because I feel like that's what's one of the biggest things that's missing is just the aspect of fun. You know what I'm saying? Because it feels like nowadays, playing games is becoming a job, and it's becoming one of those things that, hey, you have to get good in order to get the bag. Which, I mean, like, getting the bag is important, but I feel like you're putting on more than what you have to in terms of that. And I feel like, having fun is one of the biggest things. And I feel like what the message that you're trying to bring everybody is, hey, you just have some fun and have a good time, and then you see some good results, which is pretty much very important.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add to that too is that I think arguably one of the funnest things about fighting games is watching yourself grow and get better. Like the grind, the fighting game grind from like, oh, I hate playing ranked, people are like destroying me, or one of my favorite things to see online is when people who don't play fighting games, where they say, oh, he's cheesing. Have you seen, like, I've heard that I've heard that since I was a kid. Oh, he's cheesing or he's spamming, right? Those are my favorite hilarious words for people who are the uninitiated, because all they see on the screen is like, you just keep throwing the fire, you just keep throwing the Hadouken ball over and over. It's like, well, once you figure out that there's levels to this shit, you'll realize, oh, you can jump over that, my friend. Oh, once you get to the next level, oh, you do know you can go through that, or you can hit them before it does that, right? So I think the greatest gift that I've gotten from fighting games is the joy of learning and growing. Because that's probably one of the biggest, most satisfying things you could take from it, because fighting games are fun. But I do understand why people, immediately quit, is because when you bump into a sweaty player like me who doesn't let you play the game, guess what? People like games because they want to play them. And fighting game, if you're good at a fighting game, you might not let somebody else play. It's arguable. I've heard people say, "Oh, the fundamental fighting game 101 is not letting the opponent play the game." I wouldn't agree wholeheartedly, but I wouldn't disagree in terms of your goal. Obviously, you don't want them to play because you want to win.
Absolutely.
But if you learn how to play, then you'll learn much more about losing than you do about winning, and I think that's where the learning comes in, which is the fun part.
Absolutely. So it's always fun to learn. I mean, that's pretty much how life is at this point. It's always a learning game, and every time it's a learning game, you just learn new stuff. So that's pretty much very important. So let me just say, Joe, really appreciate you being on here for sure. I mean, this has been one of I feel very. After this, I feel very smarter. And the way how you dissect everything in terms of what you have been through, in terms of what the FTC state is and everything, it's very, very insightful. So I do have a question. I think it's my final one, which is very much, where can people reach you out at?
You could reach me. I do have a Twitter, so you can reach me on there. I'll try to get on there more often. I kind of just poke in whenever, whatever's the latest and greatest news or drama or whatever the case is. But you can catch me on Twitter. What is my Twitter? You'll have to give me a sec here, because I'm very aloof when it comes to socials. But I think Twitter's a pretty safe spot to catch me in. Definitely feel free to follow me on there. It's just at JoDesef. So yeah, but bring it. You can't forget where you came from, right?
Yep.
And, it's just at JoDesef on Twitter. You can follow me there. I do post on. I don't post often on Instagram, if ever, but whenever I do, post on socials to let people know that I'm streaming, the few times that I do, you can follow me on Instagram And that one is also is just Joe the Chef there. So you can follow me on Instagram, Twitter. That's usually where I post when I am streaming. That'll probably change if I, um, go anywhere further with this thing and start like fully rebranding. I may even make a different, entire page. Um, Facebook. You know what? Nah, I'll just stick with Instagram and Twitter for now. Facebook is weird. Um, I only go on Facebook for catch up with you guys and family. But yeah, that's the socials. And then obviously when I do stream, you can catch me on Twitch, and my Twitch is just twitch.tv/Joe the Chef there as well. Um, and YouTube, I do have some work to do there. I haven't posted there in a very long time. But you could also find me there at Joe the Chef. So pretty much all my socials is Joe the Chef, and that's JoThesep, as in peanut, Joe the Chef. So it's basically just Joseph with the in the middle. But yeah, YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, Twitter. It's all either Joe the Chef or at Joe the Chef. If I post anything, that's where you'll find me.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I greatly appreciate you joining this interview, my man. It's been an honor to have you on here.
Oh,
And I've
you
learned
honor me.
I've learned a lot. I even though I feel like, like I said, it's like I know you, but now I know you a lot more in terms of what type of person you are, and it's pretty much enlightening. So I greatly appreciate you joining this interview, my man. And for those who are listening, just give my boy a follow. I know, like I said, he kind of said he doesn't really like kind of go into it as much, but I mean, when he starts streaming, you'll learn a lot more in regards about this man, and how much he's one of my instrumental reasons in terms of how I am what I am today at this point. So there's like I always say there's a lot of people that has kind of that I benefited from in terms of making me in terms of who I am and everything like that. This man right here on this comms right now is one of the reasons why I am what I am. So I greatly appreciate you, my brother.
I appreciate you too. You definitely make me feel way more valuable than I feel about myself at times. This guy has, helped me through a great many dark times in life as well as in game, and couldn't ask for a better friend, a better peer in this fighting game journey. And I'm proud of everything that you've done. And yeah, man, it's an honor, a blessing to be on here. The fact that you even want to talk to me or let people know who I am is it's insane to me. So if I ever make it to the top, I'm taking you with me. All right.
Of course, man. I appreciate that. All right, folks. And this has been another Mega Man's Legend episode. Tune in for the next one. And I will see you all soon. You got any last shout outs you want to do, bro?
Well, gotta give the shout outs to the wife, Remy. I love you forever. You already know this. Jericho, if you see this sometime in the future, I love you. You're my boy. You're my boy. That's my son right there. Literally. Not like son. I mean like son. Um, and if you ever want to play me in the fighting games in the future, my son, uh, get good. But hopefully, if I've done my job, then he will be, right? That's
Yep.
the future. But yeah, shout outs to the brotherhood. Um, we like to keep things real bizarre in there. Shout outs to the FGC, who's you know as much as I have my opinions about it, it's been instrumental in making me who I am. So I'll always have love for the fighting game scene and fighting games as a whole. And once again, just play. Everybody, just pick a fighting game, have fun with it, and yeah, shout outs to you, of course. Shout outs to um yeah, just everybody watching. You know what I mean? Shout out to you guys.
Absolutely, man. In the word, in the words of Bizarre World, we'll see you all soon.
Yes, sir.